All right. Thank you for being here today. Fostering Media Connections publishes media and journalism to lead the conversation about child welfare, youth justice, and youth homelessness in America. These systems interact with millions of the nation's most vulnerable children and families every year, and research has shown that deep involvement with any of these systems connect to dismal outcomes in adulthood. And yet they are often ignored by mainstream and local media outlets. Youth Voices Rising is a media training program for youth with lived experience in foster care, juvenile justice systems, and/or homelessness. FMC launched the program in 2016 to help youth gain the skills and confidence they need to articulate the policy and practice changes needed to improve the system, because they are the experts on what solutions might work. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Ivory Bennett. I am the program manager for Youth Voices Rising. I have 17 years of lived experience in foster care and a professional background in education leadership and national child welfare advocacy. Today, we're exploring the connections between foster care and family bonds. Welcome to our fourth and final webinar of 2024, Strategic Sharing and Storytelling. We plan to discuss the impact of child welfare on sibling and familial relationships and get multiple perspectives of children and people who share the same systems, engagement, circumstances. Forgive me, that was a mistake. We're talking about strategic sharing and storytelling today and how you can be an ally in that, or if you're a lived expert, how you can do that to the best of your ability. Welcome everyone to this transformative discussion. If we can go around the room of our guests, our webinar panelists today, if you could just share your name, your pronunciation, your pronouns, and tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here today, that would be awesome. And if we could get started with Bianca.
Thanks, everyone. So my name is Bianca Bennett Scott. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a child welfare consultant. I'm from the Bronx, New York State. Yay. And also I am an operations coordinator at Foster Club, the National Network for Foster Youth. And I'll pass it over to Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Mora. I'm from Los Angeles County, and I use she, her pronouns as well. I work in event production, and I'm here as now I'm in my 30s, and I was in the foster care system during my adolescence and have also been a foster caregiver. So just really excited to share my perspective today as an older alumni.
Next, we have Brittany.
Good morning. My name is Brittany Lee. I'm a former foster youth out of Washington State, where I spent 17 years in the system, as well as Ivory here, and my pronouns are they and she.
Thank you, Brittany. Next, we have Nick.
Good morning, everyone. Nick Vasquez from Northern California. I grew up in the foster care system for about 10 years and started writing poetry while in the system. I've been writing poetry professionally and doing case management, and I'm excited to bring these perspectives to the panel today.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to need some of your poetry soon. Alexis, you're next.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alexis Kramer. I use she, her, born and raised in Minnesota. I'm a parent advocate, and I'm here to share my lived expertise of being involved with the child welfare system. So happy to be here, and I'll pass it to Sabrina.
I appreciate you. Hi. Hey, Alexis. My name is Sabrina Abong. She, her pronouns. I have 8 years of lived experience in foster care in the state of California, and I'll pass it along.
Thank you, Sabrina. And last but not least, Shaquan.
Hey, I'm Shaquan Tyler, and I'm in Los Angeles. My pronouns are he, him, his, and what was the other part? I'm sorry.
If you want to share your child welfare experiences and how that relates to today.
Oh, so yeah, I grew up in the boys' shelters and kinship care, and yeah, it was some stuff, but how it relates to today is being here, having that understanding, bringing that perspective to the table, and interacting with others who also have that. Just, it's a form of like healing and also sharing, which I really appreciate.
Thank y'all so much. I feel like a proud older sister, like cousin right now. I don't know why. I'm just already so proud of y'all because you're just amazing for being here with us and sharing your stories and trusting us to share your stories. So thank you again for advocating for yourselves and others today through your testimonies. I just want to have a reminder that if you do have something difficult to share, maybe give a trigger warning for the audience and your fellow panelists. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So my first question for you all today is on creating safe spaces. So what specific practices or environmental cues have helped you to feel safe and supported when sharing your story? And how can child welfare professionals implement these practices to foster respectful and healing storytelling environments? And I'll drop that in the chat because that's a lot for you, but feel free to share whoever feels called.
I don't mind kicking it off. So, some specific practices I think that really helped me feel safe and supported in sharing spaces is preparation. And when I say preparation, I mean preparation for all. It was really important for me as a young person growing up in the system to have someone be transparent, open, and clear with the expectations of what me sharing would be. And also preparing me for both the benefits and also possibly the consequences that might come from it. A lot of times young people come in saying we're ready to share, but we don't understand the totality of everything. So it's really important to prepare us for that. But also it's important to prepare the audience and the people being engaged as well, and not solely focus on the young person who's sharing their story. I say that because I've worked with a young person. I remember prepping them for a panel we had pertaining to permanency. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh, well, are you preparing them for me? Because I'm going to say whatever I want to say." And I had to really sit there and think about it. Like, are we preparing our audience members to be prepared for what our young people are going to say, especially in an authentic way? So it's important to prepare not only the young person, but also the audience members in being open and releasing some of their biases and intuitions so that they can be open and honest for the young person. So it's a dual communication. So I think that's really important.
Thank you, Bianca. You really reminded me also that it's important as practitioners, even for those of us who are alumni and do this work, to also recognize when someone's not in a position to tell his or her story or their story, right? And so not being exploitive of the live experts in your network, even if they did show up, even if they're the only ones you can find, if you recognize that they're not in a healthy, safe space to be able to do that work of sharing their storytelling, have integrity and don't have them do it. And if you can provide them with resources to support them so that they can get well and be healthy and strong enough to do that work, then that's okay. But we need to also stop exploiting people's lived experiences for the sake of checking off a box or making money. Let's be honest. If anything, YVR, we're going to be honest about it. It might not be comfortable, but strap in your seatbelts because here we go. Would anyone else like to share on that? What can we contribute to the audience today to help them facilitate safe spaces for telling their stories?
I'll jump in. Go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. I wanted to tag on what Bianca shared, that also being aware of power dynamics. I remember being in my early 20s or even like late teens, and certain organizations that I had been receiving support from would ask me to speak at like an annual gala or, at a fundraising event. And I was still receiving services from some of those organizations. And so they had a power dynamic. And because I felt like if I said no, because I was so young, I felt like maybe they would be upset or maybe it might affect me receiving services. So I felt like I had to be brave and say yes so that I could help an organization that was helping me or had helped me in the past. I think that organizations can leverage clients or like youth that they worked in the past. So for example, now that I'm older and I'm in my 30s, I'm in a much better position to share my story from a much more authentic and like healed space than when I was 22 years old and still figuring a lot of things out. And so it does not always have to be like a person or a youth who is receiving services right now. I think it's okay to leverage someone that might be in a better position, and not even put that ask on a young person, again, because they may not be completely honest because they may be afraid, or I think that's just something that we should be aware of. If you are asking them, that there is compensation. I remember sometimes these places were really far away, or they were around people that, you know, looked very different than me, or just were in spaces that I was not familiar in being. And so again, the power dynamic of these galas, fundraising efforts, who the people in the room are. And then as far as preparing for some of these events, I remember sometimes being asked to prepare or like practice in a room full of staff members, like 5 different people who might have been critiquing like the way I was saying something, or if I could say something in a more emotional tone. And I remember being really put off and just uncomfortable, because it definitely felt more like a performance than it did me sharing my story. And I remember also being in really small rooms with maybe 1 or just 2 people who were really handling my story with a lot of grace and love, and who would like remind me, hey, it's okay if we need to take a break, or, you know, we can meet another time, or you're doing a great job. It's okay if you don't want to include that. If that's too much, we can take it out. And so having the experiences of what it felt like to be in a room with someone that definitely felt exploitive, and then someone that did handle it with care. In both positions as a young person, I did do both of them, but I only connect still with the people who did provide a safe, like physical environment for me, but also an emotional environment. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Jazz. I think I saw Nick unmute. Did you want to?
Yeah, to build off of Jess and sorry, a little nervous. To build off of everyone's points, I think it's also helpful to acknowledge that every single foster youth has had their lived experience minimized, dismissed, challenged. We've been guilt tripped, shamed for it by the people that we're supposed to be sharing with: therapists, social workers, case managers, parents, everyone. And so when I'm entering these spaces, either by coaching my clients in like a performance or creative writing, or sharing like the real thing, it starts with that acknowledgement that you've had this happen to you. You've had your story minimized, you've had your voice minimized. So where do you want to go from there? How do you want to share your story? Do you want to share it one-on-one? Do you want to share it in a group? I've worked with many clients who feel very comfortable sharing in like a large audience at like an open mic, because it's a crowd of strangers. They'll never see those people again, but they won't share with a therapist because there's an intimacy there that's too much. So honoring that space from the get-go, and then working with that person to tailor their message to how they want to share it, the way they want to share it, is in my experience, that's been very helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nick. You're really highlighting some of the strengths that comes along with like media and training and theater training too, because a lot of what you just mentioned is innately ingrained in that. And I only say that because I have a background in theater professionally as well. And so, you know, again, getting youth access to activities that enrich them in one way or another can ultimately prepare them to share their stories, whether or not, you know, you see the connections. And I just want to highlight that importance. And thank you so much for sharing, Nick. Something also that was highlighted with all of our responses so far is the need for a certain level of healing, that people have to have a certain level of healing achieved to be able to engage in this work and share their stories in a way that doesn't hurt or harm themselves further. So thank you all for sharing those beautiful responses. We're going to move on to our second question. It is on avoiding stereotypes and tokenism. And for our audience, please feel free to continue dropping your questions. We will get to them towards the end of today's presentation. So what are some common pitfalls professionals should avoid, such as stereotyping or tokenizing, when inviting lived experts to share their stories? What practical steps can they take to ensure that every narrative is treated with nuance and individuality? And so one example I can give you to start it off is offer lived experts money, pay them for their time and the resources they spend on sharing their stories and showing up. That's one way to honor them and avoid stereotyping and tokenism and exploitation. But I'll pass it over to our panelists. What do y'all think?
For finding healing and avoiding stereotypes, it was. So for avoiding stereotypes, what I think from my own personal experience, don't bring your bias to like the situation that's already complicated. Like it's kind of like things, I don't know, I feel like have like a put your put yourself in their shoes type of mindset. So it's kind of like if you wouldn't want someone to like come for certain qualities about who you are or that represent your identity, you know, especially as a professional, like why would you, you know, I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I get what you're saying. It's kind of like don't bring in your bias into the storytelling. And so don't place your own judgments and values. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Shaquan, but don't allow that to flower the way that you're inviting your lived expert guests in to share their stories. And don't expect them to tell it in a way that you would tell it. Allow them to be who they are and to share their story in a way that feels authentic to them. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. But that's kind of what I was picking up from what you were putting down.
Yes, basically, yeah. What you said. Um, especially because I feel like the bias can really it can really mess with the way the youth are growing and how they are even perceiving life. And that goes with them for the rest of their life. Like our minds are still developing until the age of 25. Everything that happens in that period is like very influential on the rest of your life. So it's just like that's very important. I feel like that has to be like practiced more. And I think I know because I did AmeriCorps and I had to go through the same trainings myself. So I know that there is training and that they're being taught some of these things. It's just depending on whose bias it is or just being accountable and making sure that some of these people are accountable for stereotyping, for placing unfair standards on some folks and not others because that makes you have some type of complex about yourself moving forward. I'm not saying everybody will have a complex, but it does affect the way you view yourself, especially as a young youth.
Thank you, Shaquan. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I want to share real quick. I actually had the privilege of going to it was called Shadow Day for California's Connection, which is a nonprofit here organization here in California. So I was actually very fortunate to go shadow a senator. I won't name names. Anyways, I got really I want to say like triggered, like kind of put in a box because he kept saying like, "Oh, where's the foster at?" Oh, this is the foster, like this is my foster for today, it's like, and I was like, what the heck, like, fool, like I'm not just a foster, and like, and also like I have my name and I told you my name, like that's really rude. Anyways, it was like really triggering, so don't put labels on me. And obviously I'm here because I'm trying to better my life, so yeah, I don't like, especially if you know that, don't put a label on me because I am more than just a foster.
We are so much more than our lived experience, Sabrina. I'm sorry that you experienced that, and thank you for uplifting that today. Anyone else want to share before I move on to our third question?
For me, oh,
Go ahead.
thank you. For me, what comes up is, and I don't know exactly like how directly this fits into this question of stereotyping and tokenism, but I would say be mindful, especially of developmentally where youth are at, because we know that that doesn't always reflect their age and what we think someone, you know, may present at a certain age. And also in general ages, because I've noticed that so many national and local organizations that want to bring youth in, especially bring youth in mass and not like a singular role, but like a group kind of thing, like a panel or a cohort committee or a council. They tend to go for like that 16 to 24, 18 to 26 age range. And I wanted to just say like to be mindful of that because like my earliest experiences sharing my story, I was like 17, 18, 19, and I'd been in the system until since I was 2 and throughout my entire childhood. So it was like I am just leaving the system or I just got like that's my third day out here. So I had to like realize that especially when people are so young and fresh out the system, they're still processing. They're also dealing with those early adulthood things that they have to deal with, maybe getting their FAFSA together, all the documents they need for their life, all the medications and things that roll over into adulthood. So they're not cold turkey on any medications that they may have been in childhood. So like all these things and changes they're going through during those ages where these organizations are wanting to bring them in to share their story, I think they're more likely to be exploited because they don't know, they haven't seen this panel, they haven't been on this panel or heard these things yet. And I'm glad that there's more and more things like this as we go. But when I was starting out, I didn't know that I could ask for money. So I'm pouring my heart out, not knowing how to mitigate how much of my story I tell. So I'm re-traumatizing myself, getting secondhand trauma from other folks who are telling their stories, taking me back to a place I don't want to be in, and I'm getting a $25 gift card for it. So it's also like be mindful of the ages and the vulnerable spaces of people who you're bringing in. I'm now 30 and I've processed my childhood way better than I did even 2 years ago or 5 years ago. So I have more expertise and ways to articulate what I've been through. I've also been in therapy to process it, both informal and formal therapies to process it. So I feel like I have more to bring to the table now than I ever did. So utilize older youth, utilize that, yeah, like all ages of youth, and don't just cut that cap off because people still have valuable things to bring to the table.
Thank you, Brittany. I want to uplift something you said, and then we'll go to Sabrina. I think that you were trying to speak, is that there's a diversity in aging. And when you look at people with lived experience across multiple generations, you're getting data-driven testimonies and information. So there tends to be a devaluing of people with lived experience after the age of 26, like Brittany alluded to. But there's so much to learn from their lived experience if it happened 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years ago, lest we forget history repeats itself, right? So let's be mindful and considerate of intentionally seeking out people from different backgrounds, different ages, different regions, right? Because regions impact the stories that we tell and the lives that we've lived and experienced. Was it Sabrina? Did you want to share?
No, I just want to, I agree that, once you hit a certain age, it doesn't matter how old how old you are, like your experience is still valid and it's still very important. And I want to uplift that too.
Thank you so much. Are y'all ready for your next question? Okay, our next question is on empowering through storytelling. In your experience, what approaches make storytelling a healing and empowering process for lived experts? How can child welfare professionals support storytelling in a way that enhances resilience and self-empowerment? And I can kick us off. I am a professional writer outside of this work, and I found it to be really cathartic and healing to be able to put my story to paper and to have it published. But not only that, but to share my story through the written word that has been used and leveraged when people are writing policies and making decisions. People use my lived expertise stories, whether it be an op-ed or a magazine entry, to affect and change policy, to, look at how can things be better and do them differently. And so that's just one way that I've been able to do it personally. And that's a lot of the work that we do here at Youth Voices Rising too. But I want you to hear from our panelists. So panelists, take it away. And in your experiences, what makes storytelling a healing and empowering thing for you?
I think for me and for a lot of the youth that I've coached in poetry and creative writing, it comes down to the power of language, giving us a tool to describe things that either we don't fully remember or we haven't processed, taking these really broad, nebulous memories, fears, traumas, giving them a taste, a texture, a sound, something that makes it concrete. And I feel like it's that process of engaging with that, destroying it through revision, and then cathartic release, publishing, speaking out loud, sharing, that becomes this healing process for us.
Just to add to what Nick was saying, I feel like it also helps normalize what we've been through and shows that we're not alone. Like for me, especially my background as an African American woman, speaking out was always a fear of mine. And growing up in this system, we can all resonate that it came with risk. You were either punished, removed, or isolated in some capacity. So in essence, it allows us to have a sense of normalization, and it helps us rewrite our stories and helps us eliminate our fears and face our fears in some ways. And I really appreciate Tools. There's a really good book, The 357 Model by Darla Henry, which is focused on younger children and helping them analyze permanency, grief, and loss. But I appreciate using those really kid-like activities, playing with Play-Doh or painting or doing stuff like that, because it kind of brings you back into the childhood that we really wish we could have and helps us really sit into those emotions and understand how we feel. So even don't let age restrict you from utilizing certain activities to engage young people. Again, Brittany said, like, developmentally and age-wise, we might be in two different spaces. So be open to thinking outside of the box and being creative and finding textile ways to do things.
Thank you, Bianca. Anyone else want to share?
To kind of piggyback off of that, I would also say, even from my experience with like AmeriCorps, I was at the Boys and Girls Club, and I was able to work with the kids there. It was the height of the pandemic, because I just felt like, okay, there's something I want to kind of do or give back to my community while I can, because I just know it was tough for a lot of people. So I just wanted to figure out something. And it definitely was healing. And I didn't even realize how healing it could be to see the youth and see how you're the mentor. Like, you could be a mentor like the mentors that were in your life and guided you out of that dark mindset or making the wrong decision. And it was kind of like, it was very powerful, uplifting. And it's like, you learn so much from that too. In an area where you're trying to tutor or educate, you can learn so much. And it was just really enlightening. Sorry, I don't know if I really got out on that too much. I don't know if I
You
moved
did, Shaquan. I'm hearing you turned your pain into purpose,
Yeah.
and we're able to leverage that to kind of mentor and help those who are coming behind us. And that's part of this process too, as people with lived experience. Like, we didn't just go through what we went through for ourselves. For those of us who don't have siblings or little cousins who are in the system, it feels good to be able to help those who experience it behind us, right? And that's why we show up and why we do this work. And I just want to reiterate, for any of you here today, if you want to write your stories with us, please feel free. Hit me up. We can get your story published too. Not only can you share it verbally, but you can write it down and share it with us in our website as well. So thank you so much for sharing. I think I might have seen someone come off mute or want to share.
I wanted to share too. So I was a kinship caregiver to two of my siblings for about 6 years in my 20s, and they were both 11 and 12 at the time. And I didn't realize it, but they were always telling each other, do you remember when we did this? Or do you remember when this thing happened? And it took me a while to realize that, like, and sometimes they would kind of interrupt each other. And I'm sure everyone's had this experience where it'd be like, no, that didn't happen, or it was this way. Like, this is what actually happened. And so what I'm getting at is that they were keeping each other's like stories and memories alive. And it kind of hit me during that time that because I lived in a group home when I was in foster care during my entire adolescence, I did not keep in contact with anyone from my group home, like not the people that lived there over like 5 years or the staff. And so I started to kind of worry that that part of my life would be erased if even though it wasn't the best. It just felt like if I didn't tell anyone about the things that happened, both good and bad, during my time in foster care, that like my stories would just die, or that part of my life would die. And I think part of storytelling too is being a good listener. And so like I would tell my sisters stories, or I would tell my significant others my stories. And now, they'll tell me like, oh, remember that time when we were 16 and you said that you XYZ at the high school, or you said that group home staff, blah, 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 blah. And I think like I really cherish that as I've gotten older, how they're keeping my stories. Or if I tell someone that I trust something, and then maybe a year later, they'll still be like, hey, they remembered something I said and they bring it up. And then when someone does share with you, also just validating that they shared with you, shared a vulnerability with you, thanking them for sharing with you. Um, you know, just letting them know that you're always, that you're there if they want to share more or if they wanted to share again. I think that's always made me feel really cared for after I have shared something, because maybe I didn't tell that person that maybe I wasn't super sure if I wanted to tell them that detail or tell them that story. And afterwards, showing that you're a safe space, because I'm sure we've also experienced, well, I've also experienced people weaponizing my story or sharing my story without my consent or saying my story in a way that was inaccurate. And so just holding that story and that lived experience with care, I think, is also very important.
Thank you, Jazz. You're highlighting a really important point that I want to highlight for the audience, which is, of being developmentally appropriate in sharing your story and in telling your story. And so for those of you who are going to work with kids who might be the ages of 0 through 16 or 0 through 18, being mindful of what language you use and how you share that story is going to be crucial to keeping them safe and well in hearing that story or sharing their own stories. And how do you do that? Well, come ask Youth Voices Rising and we can have a meeting with you so you can figure it out. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next question, though, which is facilitating authenticity. So how can child welfare professionals create opportunities for storytellers to present their narratives in authentic ways without imposing preconceived narratives or expectations? Are there any specific questions or prompts that help foster this authenticity?
I feel like some of this ties back to what we talked about with like tokenizing and stereotyping. When we're asking youth to share, I feel like it's important for there to be room for us to say no, room for us to decline, because there's already an inherent power and privilege in asking us to share. We are underprivileged when we're sharing. We're sharing to a group of people that have minimized us, dismissed us, and just having that space for us to say no, for us to turn it down, for us to say, I'm not comfortable, already is going to make the space so much more healing and better for us to feel comfortable sharing.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I think it also goes like showing up as your authentic self. Like if you know that you don't share anything about yourself to the youth that you're inviting in or the lived expert you're inviting in, just be mindful of how that colors the entire environment that you're creating for the storytelling and sharing. And so your vulnerability, and I'm not asking you to trauma jump on them, but if you can just be real and be engaged and just be honest about what you don't know. Say, hey, maybe I don't know anything about being in foster youth, but I care deeply about people who experience foster care, and I work hard to make it a better experience for those who are in it. That's all the authenticity that you need sometimes. Anyone else want to share? How can we facilitate authenticity?
I just wanted to double down on Nick's points, because I completely agree and say that I feel like, yes, heavy on like there being room to say no, and that not create tension or potentially even like you losing that opportunity. Um, because I think that in itself like speaks loudly. For example, one of my earliest advocacy opportunities was a child welfare based nonprofit based out of Seattle that will remain unnamed, but they had a campaign that they were trying to bring awareness of the increase of Black youth going into the system without um the increase of like Black families and parents looking to foster and adopt to match that to meet the cultural needs of Black youth, which I agree is important. And myself having been in a lot of transracial foster homes, i.e. a home where I was being raised by someone who didn't reflect my culture and like what I looked like, they wanted me to share basically about like why I needed that and why I needed to be in a Black foster home. And they were kind of trying to spin my narrative for me. And what I needed in that moment was for them to just ask why it matters to me instead of shifting and saying like, well, we need you to say that you wanted to be in a Black foster home basically so bad. And the thing is that I was, but kinfolk or not, I still wasn't getting my needs met in those homes. I could be just as neglected in those homes, hair or otherwise, than in a non-Black home. It made no difference. And in fact, I really valued growing up despite the, uh-oh, somebody left. Oh, it was Ivory. But anyways, despite the like abuse in that household, I really valued growing up with learning about another culture. I grew up in a Filipino foster home. I got to go to the Philippines. I got to eat the Filipino food and like, because she was a professional chef and all these different things that I wouldn't have gained elsewhere. So I do value that I had that kind of cross-racial ethnic experience in the foster home. So I think that's one thing that I'm like, there are ways to spin. There are ways to say why I think it matters without like trying to change my story and change my point of view and narrative. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Brittany. And I also want to uplift, like, so what are some ways to do that in a practical way? So allowing youth the opportunity or lived experts the opportunity to say no can look like if you've published something of theirs on your website and they ask you to take it down, taking it down. It can look like if you've invited them into a space to read something or write something or speak for you, allowing them the option to say no without penalizing them. It just looks like that open door of we value you and we value your story and we also value your safety and as being a storyteller and a sharer, and allowing them to have that open door policy with their stories. Okay, for the sake of time, and these are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful responses. Again, y'all are just making me so proud of my heart and my mind and my spirit. But we have to save time for questions from our audience. I'm going to skip on to our last question, and then we're going to get into some questions that have been dropped in the chat and some questions that people might be percolating in their minds right now. So for the sake of time, we're going to move on to our final question of the day. So how can we build partnerships with lived experts? What can child welfare professionals do to build strong, respectful partnerships with lived experts that support long-term collaborative storytelling efforts? And how can these partnerships help promote more effective advocacy and system change? And I'll start us off. You can pay people for their lived expertise stories. And so would anyone like to jump in and continue on? How can we build partnerships with lived experts that facilitates that respect and mutuality?
Yeah, I've been trying to say some things, but just been sitting on some questions that I couldn't really answer, even though I answered it. But for this one, I would just say like having more spaces like this, just being in a space where you can feel like you can relate to somebody else or learn about other people's perspectives is a way to get people willing to open up more and share their story, especially with professionals. Like me personally, like I have a hard time being in a court setting over Zoom because it's just so uncomfortable. You know, everything is on Zoom now, and you know I'm not used to it. And then sometimes like I don't know how to like be myself or you know like what to say, what not to say, like because sometimes I can't get the words out that I want to get out. And then when I do, it's just like it feels like to me that it's coming off in a way that I'm just not like how do I say it? Like I'm not used to saying in a way that other people can say. If that makes any sense. So like I say how I feel in a different interpretation than other people see it as because I don't have that vocabulary. That everybody else had. I grew up with a different education. And so I have to like teach myself every single day on how to best like professionally speak to other professionals without them feeling, oh, she's arrogant or, you know, she's she's not fit to be a parent because she don't have the knowledge, or she's stupid. Because that's just how I was taught growing up, that I wasn't going to amount to anything. And I had to advocate for myself through my storytelling to get my mindset out of the feeling of me not amounting to anything. So yeah, I guess just in terms of like being in a setting with professionals, just being able to listen and build a rapport with someone rather than just going up there and judging them just based on the color of their skin, or how they look or how they act or how they talk, that type of thing.
Thank you, Alexis. I want to reiterate to our audience, I heard relationship building is important. I heard accepting people who they are and how they are is important, and not devaluing people because of their differences, but accepting them in whatever fashion they show up and how they desire to share their storytelling. And if they do want to tell their story in a different way, empowering them with resources to be able to learn different ways to share their stories. I want to pass the mic over to Brittany and then Bianca.
Yeah, I've always really appreciated spaces where there was flexibility in people's ability or want to code switch or not. I've really appreciated when people are allowed to show up authentically, and I've known former foster youth who share, and a cuss word might slip out, or some vernacular that is close to their like kind of demographic or what have you, like, comes out. And I think holding space for that is vital, and knowing that people are allowed to show up as their full selves. Another thing, and I just lost the thought, where'd it go? I was gonna say, yes, when you're bringing in young people, the spaces that I've really appreciated how they did this, they did a pre-check-in, like morning of or evening prior. So that kind of like pre-care and aftercare also, because sometimes I have way more anxiety leading up to a speaking engagement or some kind of child welfare work, but sometimes it's after that I'm like, it's done, I'm drained, I'm PTSD symptoms coming in or whatever, what have you, however it shows up, I'm stressed, I'm anxious. So that checking in after is vital, whether that looks like a Zoom meeting where like, let's discuss, how did it go, any feedback. Also, yeah, taking in feedback from former foster youth. That's always been really nice when someone holds space for that. And you can see how they've grown, and not just doing it to do it, but like they bring in the next cohort of whoever it may be, maybe, and there is growth. There is those practices put into place.
Thank you, Brittany. I want to uplift for our audience. If y'all have mental health specialists on your team, that means making them available before, during, and after the storytelling. That's one beautiful way to support, or providing financial resources for people to get access to mental health support specialists before, during, and after the storytelling instance. I want to go ahead and pass the mic to Jazz. Jazz, please share with us what you.
I wanted to add that, like, with stories, there's like, it's not always just speaking to a, like a large group. I think Nick had put it in the chat earlier that a lot of times folks want to, like, child welfare professionals will maybe want someone to come and talk to younger youth or youth in currently who are in the system about, like, here's a success story of someone who like got into college, and or this is someone who and it's like the same stories, like they're successful, they worked really hard, they got a full scholarship, and it's part of that tokenism of like just reinforcing, because we know the education rates of foster youth. And so if you're just bringing in the same person who's saying the same story over and over again, that there's so many different kinds of stories. Maybe someone plays an instrument and like they can just come and share their love of instrument, like that's a story. Maybe someone loves to cook and wants to pursue that professionally. That's not someone getting into a 4-year degree. Nick is a writer. Like, I'd love to hear how, they talked a little bit about when they started writing. There's just so many beautiful stories out there. And I think that they don't have to be in front of, a donor group. And for me, while I have different identities, the older I get, my time in, being a former foster youth and a foster care alum, it still shapes my everyday life, getting married, the thoughts of having children, learning how to take care of a home, things that I didn't know how to do. Like, I am constantly reminded, how I am molded by this identity that I did not choose. And the stories will be forever until, as long as we're here. And so really lean into more stories that, or ask youth, what kind of, like, what are you interested in, and get creative other than just, again, wanting to highlight, just the college, going to a 4-year college and becoming, this kind of career. I think that does a disservice of all the kinds of opportunities that exist out there for young people.
Thank you, Jazz. One more thing I want to reiterate for our audience, and this is why I invited y'all and why I'm so excited to have y'all here today, is that as we grow and change, so do our lived experiences, right? And so we're so much more than our lived experiences, but what we needed and what we experienced in our 20s is way different in our 30s, and it's going to change and shift in our 40s and 50s. And so that's why it's important to have people with diverse ages sharing and telling their stories, and the work that you do too. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My heart is full because it just gives me so much pride to see you all here today, proudly sharing your stories, feeling empowered by your stories, and impacting people positively with your stories, which aren't always easy, but are so crucial and critical to this work. I want to invite our panelists to share their contact information in the chat should you want to continue the conversation or pay them to do some work with you alongside you. And also, I want to open it up to some questions that we have in the chat. So we did have a few from earlier. Feel free to go ahead and drop them. I'm going to start with the first one that I see, which is from Georgette Todd. Can you share more specific examples of how you felt exploited? Then can you give advice on how people can avoid doing that? Paying people $10 or $15 gift cards is not appropriate for asking them to tell their stories. Anyone else want to share how specifically they felt exploited and how people can avoid that?
Yeah, for context, I'm in the process of applying for a few PhD programs, and a lot of the a lot of the child welfare social work programs, they want lived experience in foster care, but it feels so tokenizing having to talk about how much of a success I am. And when I look at how the schools treat former foster youth, like the way UPenn just completely destroyed Mackenzie Fierston's career because her lived experience didn't line up with what was like in a court document, it's like that feels so exploitive, knowing that we're putting ourselves out there. I'm putting myself out there for what? For what purpose? Don't ask people to share their lived experience unless you're going to believe it, unless you're going to really honestly, authentically validate where they've been, where they've come from, where they're at right now. And if your intent is, sorry, I'm hearing myself getting riled up here, but if your intent is to make yourself feel good, that's exploitive. Ask yourself, what is your intent in asking foster youth to share? And if your intent is to genuinely, truly make a change and make the system better, great. I'm all for it.
Thank you for sharing. And it's okay. It's okay to get riled up. That's what we do here. Jennifer, go ahead.
I also wanted to add to the payment as well, not only the amount of compensation, but the time frame of the compensation. A lot of times, young people even enter into the space of storytelling and sharing our stories because it's a form of survival. It's a way for us to get money in our pocket so we can live to see the next day. So understanding that mindset and saying, oh, I said I would pay a young person before the day of the event, after the day of the event, understanding that they really need that money and not taking 2 to 3 weeks on your time frame in order to compensate them.
Very important, timeliness and communicating what the process looks like and how much time it's going to take. Anyone else want to share? Okay, our next question is from Jennifer Wise. Who did you turn to for advice when you were just getting out of into the real world?
I'm gonna be honest, when I went to the real world for the very first time, I left foster care, I had no one. I was on the streets. So yeah.
And to add to that, Sabrina, a lot of us turn to our siblings who were in care themselves, right? And so it's kind of like the blind leading the blind in a lot of ways. Anyone else want to share?
I'll echo Sabrina. I mean, I went into a 4-year college and I did not have anyone that had an experience like me in that setting. And so I self-isolated a lot and turned to like really TV. Like I feel like most of the things I've learned about family have been from watching sitcoms because they're like feel good shows that I would just watch all the time. Um, but I think they're like I would love to be able to share my advice to someone who is going out into the real world now, but I didn't know people who were older who had been through that experience because it was just like hard to find people.
Thank you
Yeah,
for-
going
Go
off of that, I would say it's challenging because sometimes your search for chosen family can lead you down a hard path depending on the environment you're in and who you tend to like have to feel safe gravitating towards. It can be a slippery slope. Um, and especially when you're in a space when you build relationships with people or spaces that aren't exactly healthy for you, but if you don't have anyone else, sometimes you feel stuck in that. So sometimes, yeah, that chosen family aspect is a double-edged sword depending on that and your intersections as well, especially for queer youth and Black youth and youth of color.
Thank you for sharing, Brittany. Anyone else?
When I turned 18, I went straight into a transitional age youth program. And on the one hand, I felt like there was support there for, job applications, school, and independent living for like an apartment. But when it came to socializing and learning how to have healthy relationships, boundaries, mental health care, I didn't have anyone to turn to. And I mean, I was 18, I'm 32 now, and I feel like I still struggle with how to have a healthy relationship, how to set boundaries. And I had just wished that I had had other foster youth to talk to about these things, other people to talk to, because it sure as hell would have made life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. All right, our next question is from Jessica Coates. Do you have any recommendations for someone who is presenting their story publicly? Like, do you have any tips or suggestions? I can start that off. I would say do as much healing work as possible. Try to feel as healed and as whole. I'm not sure that we can ever really reach 100% per se, but just make sure that you're in a safe place in your journey before you start the work. Anyone else want to share?
There's this really great tool. Now, I'm being kind of biased, but I was also an all-star intern for Foster Club, so that's where my bias comes from. But they have I think it's free, a strategic sharing tool, which kind of talks about strategic sharing in a complex of red light, yellow light, green light. And it's a really good practice that you can do with yourself to say, okay, what are your boundaries? What are you okay with not sharing with? What are some things that you think you might have to heal from and aren't for the public view or for the public ears to hear? So I definitely suggest using that toolkit just to see how you feel and where you are about sharing at this moment.
Thank you, Bianca. And if you want to get in touch with Bianca about her experiences and her storytelling, feel free to do that. I do want to go ahead and pause. We do have someone raising their hand in the chat. Is it Unique Simone? Would you like to share your question with us? You can speak now if you like.
Yes, I would. I think that what you guys are doing is amazing. I'm a poet. I'm a former foster youth, and I'm also a foster parent. And I think that we need to do a lot of, I base a lot of my poetry around foster care, around mental health, around the needs and everything that you guys were saying like definitely about being paid properly to tell your stories, about making sure, and even if you're not being paid, making sure that you network, because a lot of times I would share my story and leave. And then I would get so many people telling me afterwards, like, you should have stayed. They were looking for you. So when I started staying, that also got me working and people hiring me for do different gigs and stuff like that. So I would definitely say after you perform whatever piece you're performing, to network, to stay there and network, because that's very important.
Thank you, Unique. And please get with me if you'd like to share your story with Youth Voices Rising specifically. And that brings us to our next question, which is how much and how should people with lived experience be compensated? I'm paraphrasing, but I'll share what we have a practice at Youth Voices Rising, and then others can chime in as well. I would say the national average for independent contracted work is about $50 an hour. So that's a great place to start when you're talking to lived experts and asking them, inviting them into spaces to share their stories. I would also advise, alongside $50 an hour, allow them to be a part of the design and building process in which you're positioning their stories so that they can have great context and be well informed as to what and how they're being brought in to do to support your work and or determine for themselves if their story is something they'd like to include in that. And then for us, we pay all of our writers a minimum of $250 a piece for 750 to 900 words. And we pay all of our webinar speakers $100, and that's for about an hour and 15 minutes or so of work. And so those are great places to start. If you'd like to talk to me about how to integrate that into the work that you're doing, feel free to reach out to me. But also, I like for our panelists to share out of their experiences what they typically like to be compensated.
I would say no, not no gift card, because I mean I understand to be grateful, but realistically I need something that's going to help me with my bills as an adult today. Like, I'm 28 years old. I don't want a gift card. If it's a gift card to get groceries, maybe, but I still want to be able to be like, okay, I can use this on a bill, or I can use this to something that's actually helping my life. And I'm telling you my story. I'm telling you about where I came from. Why do you think Amazon gift card is really going to compensate for that, or be like something that's actually, I mean, I'm grateful and I'm always going to be grateful, but it's also kind of like, realistically, what would you want if you were in that situation? And just kind of look at it like that and give that same humanity.
Thank you, Shaquan. Options are always best, right? Maybe Shaquan doesn't want a gift card, but maybe Bill down the street does. And so provide several options for people to receive payment. Now I know you might not be able to pay them in, like, gold bars, but, but consider that there are different options for different folks. Anyone else want to share what they feel?
Yeah, I would say I've seen a range. I have friends, former foster youth friends, that have worked up their way to working in the White House with the Administration of Children and Families, and they don't do speaking engagements for less than, I think it's like $1,300, like if it's like a keynote thing. I've also had the most paid opportunities I've had for former foster youth is when I was brought in by another former foster youth. So put former foster youth in the positions where they have the say in your organizations on how much these people, these others that you're bringing in, get paid. Because I was once paid $100 an hour for 10 hours of work and got $1,000 because my homegirl, who was a former foster youth, badass Indigenous woman, was looking out for us. And that was like, I mean, I hope to cap that one day, but that was incredible. And especially the timing of these things too, like I really needed that at that time. My rent had just gone up, but anyway, but the lowest I have been paid is like $25 for easily like 4 hours of work. And that was when I needed it the most. So yeah, I would say I've seen a range of things, but I always advocate for former foster youth. Ask for what you need and then double it. My organization that I work for tried to use a picture of mine, which, a black face, a woman, like, and a quote of mine that took a lot of emotional labor. Like, this quote was like two paragraphs. And I had been crying when I said it because it was heavy, it was emotional. and they weren't trying to pay me. And when I did ask for money, I still think I lowballed myself. I asked for $350 for that photo and quote. And my homegirl, she's in child welfare too, but not a former foster youth, but it had subscribed to that organization's newsletter. And it was like after the fundraiser, oh, we raised 185K. And she was like, girl, that's why next year you're asking for $1,000 and no less. And I was like, okay, maybe you're right. It's scary asking for money, but it's literally life or death out here. We're literally paycheck to paycheck, a lot of us. So I would always say ask, negotiate, and bring up your receipts. Bring up what you've done to say, like, this is not only my PhD and lived experience, but this is also the work that I've done to understand it. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Brittany. And honestly, if any of you on this panel today have questions about that, or if you get an opportunity and you don't know how much to ask for, reach out to me, reach out to each other, reach out to someone else with lived experience who does this work, because we're talking to one another about what it costs and what we got paid. And so I'm not going to ever hold back from sharing with y'all. And hopefully you can feel free to reach out to me or anyone else in my network for that guidance. I want to thank y'all so much for showing up today. I have so much love in my heart for y'all. How did the kids do it now? Here's a little heart. So much love in my heart for y'all and appreciation for your willingness to show up and to share. If y'all want to continue the conversation or engage with us in the work that we're doing here at Youth Voices Rising, please feel free to contact me at ivory@fosteringmediaconnections.org. Please do follow us on all social medias. If there's something you want to see in a webinar, or if you want to host a webinar alongside us, please do not hesitate to do that as well. And then last but not least, if you're in a position to do so, please consider supporting us through donations so that we can have more informative webinars like this, so that we can publish more pieces and expand more youth voices and their stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you all. I hope that you have a happy holidays and safe rest of 2024. And until next time, we'll see you later. Thank you so much.